Thank you all for joining us for SICSS-Howard Mathematica's Praxis-to-Power Pre-Institute Lecture by Dr. Randall Pinkett and Dr. Jeffrey Robinson. Dr. Pinkett and Dr. Robinson are the authors of Black Faces in High Places, 10 Strategic Actions for Black Professionals to Reach the Top and Stay There. I'll begin by introducing our speakers. We will close with a few resources for you to get to know SICSS-Howard Mathematica if you are joining us for the first time. Dr. Randall Pinkett has established himself as an entrepreneur, speaker, author, and scholar. He is the co-founder, chairman, and CEO of BCT Partners, a global multi-million-dollar research, training, consulting, technology, and data analytics firm. BCT's mission is to provide insights about diverse people that lead to equity. The company has been recognized by Forbes as one of America's best management consulting firms, Ernst & Young as EY Entrepreneur of the Year, Manage HR Magazine as a top 10 firm for diversity and inclusion, the Black Enterprise BE100s list of the nation's largest African-American owned businesses, and the Incorporated 5000 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Dr. Pinkett is an expert in several areas related to emerging technology, big data analytics, social innovation, culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and is a regular contributor on MSNBC, CNN, and Fox Business News. An international public speaker, he is the author and co-author of several books, including Data-Driven DEI, the tools and metrics you need to analyze, measure, and improve diversity, equity, and inclusion, and Black Faces in High Places, 10 Strategic Actions for Black Professionals to Reach the Top and Stay There. He holds 5 degrees, including a BS in Electrical Engineering from Rutgers University, an MS in Computer Science from the University of Oxford in England, and an MS in Electrical Engineering MBA and Ph.D. from MIT. Most notably, he was the first and only African American to receive the prestigious Rhodes Scholarship at Rutgers University, as well as the winner of NBC's hit reality TV show, The Apprentice. A lifetime member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, he is happily married to Natasha Williams Pinkett and the proud father of 2 daughters, Amira and Anaya, and 2 sons, Jazz and Marquise. Now I'll introduce our second speaker, Dr. Jeffrey A. Robinson. Dr. Robinson is an award-winning business school professor, international speaker, and entrepreneur. Since 2008, he has been a leading faculty member at Rutgers Business School, where he's an associate professor of management and entrepreneurship and the academic director of the Center for Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development and research fellow at the Rutgers Advanced Institute for the Study of Entrepreneurship and Development. Through his research, business leadership, and community activities, he makes direct impacts on corporate workplaces, entrepreneurs, and economic development policy in the state of New Jersey and beyond. Emerging from his pioneering research, the New Jersey Social Entrepreneurship Institute and the CUEED Pipeline to Inclusive Innovation are national and international models for economic development and social problem solving using entrepreneurial approaches. He leads research on 4 National Science Foundation funded research projects related to inclusive innovation, including the GEM Inclusion in Innovation Initiative. Dr. Robinson is the author of many articles and books on the topics of management, entrepreneurship, and workforce diversity. He is the co-author, along with Dr. Randall Pinkett, of Black Faces in High Places, 10 Strategic Actions for Black Professionals to Reach the Top and Stay There. He is also a lifetime member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Dr. Robinson has been married to his wife, Valerie, for 22 years, and they have 3 children. Welcome, Dr. Pinkett and Dr. Robinson. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for the humbling introduction. We are both excited to have this opportunity to share some of the work that we've done with this latest book, Black Faces in High Places. And we're thankful for the invitation, for the introduction, and for the opportunity to be here. So without any delay, I'll just offer some initial opening remarks. I'll see if Dr. Robinson wants to offer any opening remarks, and then we'll dive into the slides. But suffice it to say, it is important to know that Dr. Robinson and I have a very long history. We were college roommates. We met the first meeting of the National Society of Black Engineers, and as they asked us to turn to your neighbor and say hello, we were coincidentally seated one behind the other. Mm-hmm. Gone on to be fraternity line brothers, best men in each other's weddings, business partners, and lifelong friends, uncles to our children and godparents, and the list just goes on and on and on. You could not find two people who are closer that were not born of the same womb. So
That's right.
And so we're more than just co-authors. We are brothers. And while we're here to talk about our latest work, Black Faces in High Places, we'll also talk about the preceding work, Black Faces in White Places. But that I'll turn to Dr. Robinson for any opening remarks he'd like to share.
Well, I think you said it all. We are brothers. We've had more than 30 years of friendship, brotherhood, and have traveled paths that for many folks can be very lonely. But fortunately, we had each other and a circle of friends and our village around us to support. And anytime we can give back, we do. So today we get a chance to give back through this wonderful program and partnership between Mathematica and Howard University. So let's get started.
All right. So we're here to talk about our latest book, which was released in February of 2022, entitled Black Faces in High Places, 10 Strategic Actions for Black Professionals to Reach the Top and Stay There. But this is the second book that Dr. Robinson, Jeffrey, as I call him, JR, and I have co-authored. We authored our first book in 2010. There we go, 2010. That's how time flies. And it was entitled Black Faces in White Places. And that book was essentially a reflection of our lived experience. And I suspect for those of you that are within the sound of our voices, probably your lived experience too at some point, that you've been a Black face in a white place. The only one in the classroom, the only one in an organization, the only one in the internship, the only one on the job, take your pick. And we wanted to not only capture that experience, but also offer strategies for how to navigate these environments where we are still underrepresented and not lose a sense of who you are. We conducted research with a number of prominent African Americans to understand their lived experience, but also reflected on our own lived experience, having been Black faces in many white places throughout our careers. We conducted dozens of interviews with a number of accomplished African Americans. You can see their faces here, but also the sectors and industries that they represented. And as you can see, whereas the perception of the book by some was that it was geared toward corporate professionals, although it does certainly speak to corporate professionals, it spoke to academics and the journey of aspiring scholars. It spoke to those who sought to run school districts or become principals of schools, to become executive directors of nonprofits. We even interviewed clergy to understand what was their path as a Black face in a white place. The philanthropy, the arts, media, community and grassroots organizations, even the public sector. You probably recognize some of the faces here. And the good news is, as you'll hear from Dr. Robinson in a moment, we were able to leverage all of these interviews for the subsequent book, Black Faces in High Places, as all the individuals you see here were prominent in their own right. But the focus here was their experience in navigating environments where we are still underrepresented. Now, there's a series of books that have formed the foundation and the inspiration for all of our writings. First is Success Runs in Our Race by Dr. George Fraser, the complete guide to effective networking in the Black community, one of the early books we read as we were early career professionals. Breaking Through by David Thomas and John Gabaro, subtitle, The Making of Minority Executives in Corporate America. You'll hear more about this later, but if you don't already recognize David Thomas's name, and you should, if not, David Thomas was former professor at Harvard. He's now president of Morehouse College. But among his scholarship has been Minorities Navigating Professional Environments. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey, who actually endorsed Black faces in white places before his untimely passing. Very influential book from our early years in college, in fact. The Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. You'll notice that our writings begin in a very personal, spiritual, cultural place. And that's not by accident, it's by design. How to Succeed in Business Without Being White by the late great Earl Graves, founder of Black Enterprise magazine. The subtitle speaks for, the title and subtitle, Straight Talk on Making It in America, speak for itself. And then one of our all-time favorites, both the title and the book, Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun? And we agree with that. Why should white guys have all the fun? Reginald Lewis, who created and owned the first billion-dollar business owned by an African-American. And so the book that is perhaps most inspirational from amongst the inspirational books was The Rage of a Privileged Class by Ellis Coase. And the subtitle is quite evocative. Why are middle-class Blacks angry? Why should America care? And this book, in some ways, was a predecessor to Black Faces in White Places, because it interviewed African-Americans of a predecessor generation as they were navigating corporate spaces, but in a time and place where they had to sacrifice far more than many of us have to sacrifice today. And so the quote here from Rage of a Privileged Class is that there was a silent rage that engulfs the last generation of African-Americans who confronted the reality that they might have to sacrifice their identity to advance in their organization. And we sought to both revisit the very question of what must one wrestle with in navigating professional environments, and how can you do it in a way that you can maintain a sense of identity and purpose and pride and purposefulness. And so with that, I'll now pass to Dr. Robinson, because that book, written in 2010, set the stage for 10 years later in 2020, when we had a conversation that was the catalyst for what we now released as Black Faces in High Places. Dr. Robinson, the floor is yours.
Thank you there, Dr. Pinkett. So one of the conversations we had was right around the George Floyd murder, about what are Black professionals, Black leaders at the highest points of their organizations doing in this moment, right? We were concerned about that. And you started to see some movement when we could see, Ken Frazier, and who was CEO of Merck, and Thasunda Brown Duckett, who was at the time, she was over at she was at JP Morgan Chase, I believe, or maybe it was Citibank. We had Rosalind Brewer, who was at Walgreens, and we started to see that these very prominent Black leaders, and there were certainly others, were starting to stand up and say things that we had not seen before. So what we were concerned about or interested in was trying to understand what was happening with the Black faces in high places. And just to connect what you saw before to this part, the generations that had come before had often sacrificed their own personal identity. And from a personal perspective, we didn't like that. We thought that there was another way, and certainly there were these Black leaders, these Black faces in high places, who were starting to show us that. And so this book is a continuation of the research we did in the first book. We had interviews in the last book. We did some new interviews in this new book. We did profiles of prominent Black leaders to see their path, and tried to understand what things they had in common as these leaders. And that's how we got to talk about these 10 strategic actions, because the stories that we read were interesting because they seem to take a different path. It's the question that we often got from some of the young people we mentor and talk to, who say, well, it seems like everybody who gets to the top of their organization or corporation, they all sell out. So do you have to sell out to be at the top of your game? And what we found from our research is that the answer is an emphatic no. But let's also talk about what strategies and how to be strategic in what they did. So that leads to some of the people that we talked to. Go to the next slide. Like Bob Johnson and Kathy Hughes, Joy Reid, people who have commented on the book. And certainly there are some great stories about how they did what they did, building companies, navigating large corporations, leading large nonprofit organizations or very influential consultancies, leading churches and running for office and all the like. Those are the kinds of stories we tell. And on the next slide, you see a set of pictures of some of the people that some of you, hopefully you recognize many of these folks who've made the way, whether it's Kathy Hughes or Bob Johnson or Senator Cory Booker, who we knew as Mayor Cory Booker, Ken Chenault, Ken Frazier, Ursula Burns, and there's a host of others here, from Oprah to David Thomas, and of course, Barack Obama and Kamala Harris. I mean, we are running the gamut on all the different types of leaders who are profiled and talked about in the book, from billionaires to leaders of leading social impact organizations. So let me just say a word about the 10 strategic actions, and then we'll give you a little sample of what's there. In the book, we took a look at what we found in common with all of these leaders. These were people who have made it to the tops of their organization, but there were certainly some commonalities about how they got there. And that's what you see on the screen. You see 10 strategic actions that really represent the many different ways that these Black professionals took to get to the top. And each of these strategic actions build on one another. And so one builds, is the foundation for two, and in two is the foundation for three, and so on and so on and so on till we get to 10. We've also organized these 10 strategic actions into 4 levels. And what's interesting to us is that we certainly naturally think this way because we're engineers. Maybe the audience today is very analytical as well. On the next slide, we can see the 4 levels are organized there: independent action, interdependent action, collaborative action, and amplified action. So we get fairly detailed on what the strategic actions are, interweaving stories of all those leaders that you saw on the screen, and in some cases our own stories. So let me turn it back to Dr. Pinkett. He can break down further a bit more about the different action levels and how we talk about that in the book.
Yeah, so this right here is the strategic action plan. It shows up early in the book, and it is your one-stop shop for understanding how we break down the 10 strategic actions and how we map them to 3 things: mindset, skill set, and tool set. We talk about the varying mindsets that we saw reflected in these Black faces in high places, whether it was the growth mindset, which says that hard work yields positive outcomes and that there's always room to learn and grow, and that one can humble oneself, that there's always more that you can learn and know. The global citizens mindset that looks at ourselves as citizens in the global context. The entrepreneur's mindset, which embraces creativity and passion and courage and resilience and vision and other facets, not only for creating a business, for example, but also what we call the intrapreneur, who applies that mindset within an established organization. The game changers mindset, which really looks at how do we transform systems. And then the servant leaders mindset, which thinks about giving, but also giving guided through a certain cultural and spiritual lens. And so you see those mindsets mapped over to all 10 strategic actions, all 4 of the levels of action that Dr. Robinson referenced. The core concepts that are a reflection back to the diagram you saw a moment ago. And then the tool sets we talk about throughout the book are largely centered around different forms of capital and how those are tools at your disposal to enact your agenda. your human capital, your skills, your knowledge, your abilities, your cultural capital, your insight to different cultures, including our own culture, to be clear. Your social capital, your relationships. It's not who you know, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And it's not who you know, it's who knows you. Intellectual capital, that which resides in teams. The ideas that Dr. Robinson and I can generate together is intellectual capital that could not be generated independent of one another. The capital most people think of when we say things like capital is financial capital. And then lastly, when we think about that last row of the servant leader and strategic action 10 and seeking not success, but significance, it's about giving of your time, your talent, your treasure, and your touch. And so this literally gives you the blueprint for the book. But we're going to go a little deeper for you because, this is the Mathematica-Howard collaboration. And so we're making our cameo here in the studio. And so we're going to go a little deeper, and we're going to pick out a couple of the strategies. A few of the strategic actions, and give you a little more of a feel for how those are relevant to aspiring professionals, students such as yourselves, as you begin and continue your professional trajectory. Hopefully this will give you some guidance along the way. So the first strategic action is not only numbered one, it's not only number one, but it is also the foremost foundational and most fundamental of all 10 strategic actions. If I go back for just a moment to the slide Dr. Robinson shared, you'll notice that the diagram has this progression as it moves upward. And each strategy builds upon each other. 2 builds upon 1. 10 builds upon 9 through 1, which means 1 is literally and figuratively the foundation of what it means to be a Black face in a high place. And that is exercising self-determination. Now, jokingly, people say to me, strategic action 1 is self-determination. That sounds like Kwanzaa. You talking about Kwanzaa? Well, we kind of are talking about Kwanzaa. That's Kuji Chagulia. For those who did not know, now you know. And this idea of self-determination is 2 parts. Part 1 is identity. Part 2 is purpose. Identity is who you are. Purpose is where are you going, or said differently, what's your reason for why you exist? What's your calling? Why are you on this planet? What are you called here to do? That's your purpose. And so it is the combination of identity and purpose that comprises self-determination. Identity is your anchor, it grounds you. Purpose is your compass, it guides you. Think of identity as having roots, and think of purpose as giving you wings to fly. Our argument, and what we've heard and what we've experienced, is that if you don't do the self-reflection and introspection early on to figure out who you are, how you define yourself, and where you're going, what direction you're headed, by the time you become a Black face in a high place, it's too late. Because the proverbial winds of pressure and change and expectations only blow faster and faster and faster and more aggressively as you climb higher in your career trajectory, that if you're not anchored and you don't know what direction you're headed, you can get easily blown off course. It's the old sayings. If you don't know, if you don't define yourself, somebody will define you for you. And if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So take to heart that strategic action 1, self-determination. If there's anything you take away from today, take that away. And without revealing too much toward the end, as Dr. Robinson said, what we sought to do is to say to young people like yourselves, students like yourselves, that who you are is enough. And whatever path you choose is a righteous and appropriate one. You need not give up too much of yourself that 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, you look in the mirror and you're not proud of who you see. No, anchor yourself in who you are and be purposeful about where you're going, because this is the first essential ingredient of being a Black face in a high place. With that, I'll pass it to Dr. Robinson for one of my favorite strategic actions, which is strategic action 3.
Yes, develop self-mastery and find meaning. On that note of finding meaning, we came across, or someone referred to us, a Japanese concept called Ikigai. If you haven't heard that one before, you could look at it on the screen. It's often represented in this sort of Venn diagram graphic, where Ikigai is in the middle. But here's what's important. It's something that was reflected often in the conversations and interviews we did for the book. When we talked to people who were at the top of their game, many of them said, "I love what I do." And that sort of tipped us off that there was something going on. They weren't just doing things for money. They actually loved what they did. And so this Ikigai concept is actually a combination of trying to better understand how to bring into alignment these different facets of our lives. So what can you be paid for in the bottom there? What do you love to do? What does the world need? And what are you good at? Those four circles intersect one another. And you can see that at the intersections of these circles, you'll see four familiar words: passion, mission, profession, and vocation. Four words which people who are thinking about their meaning in life often will turn around and say, "I'm passionate about these. This is my passion project. I'm on a mission. I'm trying to solve this. This is my profession, but this is my vocation." These words all have meaning, but they all point to different facets of who we are. And so when we talk about developing self-mastery and finding meaning, we're also talking about how people are striving to find some congruence, some place in the middle where these four facets of our lives often can intersect. That some of the most successful people out there are doing the things that they love to do, the things that they're good at, things that they can get paid for, and frankly, things that the world needs. And when they're doing all those at the same time, there's a place that has a little bit less stress, a little bit more fulfillment, and it's called Ikigai. Why is that important? Because sometimes people make pivots. We talk about that in the book, in this section, in this chapter. People make pivots, and sometimes you're on a path that does certain things. You go work in that space and realize that that's not what you want to do for the long term, and you make a pivot. I've seen that happen to lots of people, going from corporate into the nonprofit space, or changing companies, or making other decisions about what they're going to do with their time and their life. And that's where we focus a lot of attention in Strategic Action 3. So that may help somebody right there, but what I'm hoping is that it makes you think about some of the pathways that we're on, and trying to understand a bit more about ourselves. And so if you're noticing a pattern in that first level of independent action, this is inside out. So this is all work on the inside that does eventually come out, which kind of leads us down the path to some of our next set of strategic actions. So Dr. Pinkett, take us further.
Yes, and I just want to affirm that I'm a big fan of Ikigai, and Dr. Robinson was the one who put it on my radar. And in fact, we were both with our families at a Black Family Day this past weekend, and there was a gentleman who came over to me and said, "I appreciate the book, and I'm searching for my Ikigai."
That he did.
Now here's another. We're giving them a lot. We're giving some of the great graphics from the book here.
Golden gem.
I mean, this is another powerful one. So this is the work of David Thomas. I told you we would come back to David Thomas. We reference his work quite extensively and quite appropriately, and dare I say, in a way that is honoring of his scholarship. This is a summary visual of some of Dr. Thomas's work, looking at comparisons between minorities who become executives, that's the yellow line, minorities who plateau in their careers, they call those minority managers, that's the blue line, whites who become executives, That's the white line. I don't know if that was on purpose or by accident. And then whites who plateau, called non-minority managers, that's the red line. As you look at the x-axis, I can say that for this audience, you see the number of years of their career. And on the y-axis, you see the stages of their career from entry level to middle management to upper middle management to the executive level. And this invokes both strategic action 4 on networking and building power and strategic action 5 on maximizing mentoring, although Dr. Robbins will have a little bit more to say about these matters. But what you'll notice from this slide, among many things you could notice, I want to draw your attention to early career, where we're at 0 years, to middle management. And I want to focus on the yellow line of minority executives specifically. I want you to look at that line. If you're following my eyes, what you'll notice is minorities who become executives are progressing at a rate that is slower than whites who become executives. That makes sense. And even slower than whites who plateau in their careers. That's the red line. They're in 3rd place in the race to the top. And they're pretty close to minorities who plateau in the blue line. But then if you look from middle management to upper middle management, something miraculous happens. Minorities who become executives have the fastest rate of change from middle management to upper middle management, and they almost catch whites who become executives. Look at that rate of change from middle management to upper middle management. The minorities who become executives, the yellow line, are almost close to the whites. They made it there in about 7 years, and the minority executives made it there in about 8 years to upper middle management. Now, if I'm in your shoes, it begs the following question. What happened between middle management and upper middle management? Among the answers, we could have a whole presentation on this alone. But among the answers are how they thought about networks, how they thought about managing their careers, and how they thought about mentoring. Let me break down those just a bit. On managing their careers, it harkens back to everything we just talked about. Thomas found that minorities who become executives have fewer promotions than those who plateau. I'm going to say that differently, because right now you're like, what's he talking about? I'm going to say it differently. Minorities who become executives, minorities who plateau, I'm going to say it again, minorities who plateau have more promotions than those who reach the top. I'm gonna let you sit with that for a second. I'm gonna let that digest in your digestive system for a moment. How do you reconcile that? Well, I'll tell you among the ways we reconcile it. We interviewed Don Thompson, who was then president and CEO of McDonald's. And what Don Thompson told us was, and I'm paraphrasing, is that when given the opportunity to advance, if the opportunity did not tap into his passion, arguably his Ikigai, he declined, which meant he had fewer promotions because he was more discerning of what were the right positions to accept. And if it tapped into his passion, he said yes. Whereas those who plateaued said yes to everything, those who made it to the top said yes to only a few things. They had bigger leaps, faster jumps, so to speak, per the graphic here, but fewer promotions. That's the first thing. On networks, what we know about Thomas's research, it tells us that minorities who reach the top of their industry or sector tend to have very heterogeneous networks. But more interestingly, follow me, those who plateau tend to have either all minority or all white networks, meaning that African Americans who plateau tend to have an all black network or an all white network. Neither serves them well. Oftentimes the perception is they need to have a lot of white contacts. It's not the case. The research tells us it actually is diverse connections that serve you the best. Lastly, then I'll pass to Dr. Robinson to add what he wants to add here, is on mentoring. We know that there are several findings from amongst the book, but here's one of the keys I'll share with you, is that if you compare minority executives to those who plateau, I'll actually give you the numbers. Let me give you the numbers. Minority exec to minorities who plateau. Early career, minority execs have on average 1.8 mentors. Minority managers on average 1.4 mentors. They're about even, 1.8 to 1.4. Mid-career, minority executives have 2.3 mentors. Minority managers have 1.2 mentors. That's a 2x difference, 2.3 to 1.2, 2x. In the third upper middle management to executive levels of their careers, minority executives have 2.5 mentors on average. Minority managers, 0.5 mentors. That's a 5x difference. We went from 1x to 2x to a 5x difference on the number of mentors. And I know Dr. Robinson will say more about this idea of having multiple mentors to fill multiple needs. And on that note, I'll pass it to him.
Okay. So some of you are saying, well, you know, that sounds interesting for the corporate context, but what about the academic context? What if I want to go through the academic side of things? Well, some of the same principles apply. Certainly on the mentoring side of things, sometimes people think about mentoring as being, you know, or a mentor being this one all-knowing person who can give you all the things that you need. What we talk about in the book and what is what's exemplified by what Dr. Pinkett just talked about is that you need to have more than one mentor. You need to have a portfolio of mentors. You need to have a network of mentors, people who are going to look out for you in different dimensions. And we talk about those specific dimensions inside of the chapter of maximizing mentoring. But let me go a little bit further on the academic path, since I know that path well. I mean, again, both of us have done some of the things you all are trying to do. We've you know, navigated our way to some of the best schools in the nation. We have gone on to produce and do things in the research realm. You know, in fact, you know, he got 5 degrees. The reason I got 5 degrees is because he got 5 degrees, and his Ph.D. from MIT and my Ph.D. from Columbia. You know, we have gone the academic route, trying to navigate what was a foreign world for us. You know, what's this? Who is this advisor, this dissertation advisor? How should I work and do things? Well, let me say a little bit about mentoring, networks, sponsors, and allies, because you need them. You need them in your life, even if you take an academic path. So you need more than one mentor. Of course, you'll have a primary advisor, and that advisor is critical. Often your advisor, you know, is giving you some of that, is invested in your success because they're trying to get some work done by you as well. But you should also have some other mentors in your portfolio, other folks who can perhaps close some of those other gaps that you need in terms of your development. So don't be beholden only to one person. Think about who the other potential mentors are. How do you get those mentors? Well, you go to conferences, you go to different organizations, and you connect with graduate students who are at other universities, or your own for that matter. And that becomes part of your network. That's how you learn about the field. That's how you meet the right people. That's how you think about it. And again, we spend a lot of time talking about how to develop an effective network. Then we talk about sponsorship. Now, in the corporate context, sponsorship means one thing, but you know, in the context of the academic world, we are certainly talking about people who are financially supporting you. Sometimes that sponsor is literally the person in the room who gives you the fellowship, the person in the room who gives you, you know, access to the resources and to the things that you need to be successful. And so that's another great person to have in your corner. And then there are certainly allies at your university, allies in your field, people who are about it, who recognize some of the challenges that you may be facing, and are there to make to tear down some of those barriers to access or opportunity, or frankly, barriers to anything that you need. Sometimes, and I know some STEM fields are often like this, we feel left out or sidelined, or sometimes you know, put on the side. And there are allies out there who are looking out for you, putting you on the right projects, putting you in the right situations. So don't forget about those folks. Those are important folks who need to be part of your network. So that's mentors, networks, sponsors, and allies in the academic context. And certainly we can answer questions about that later if you want to talk more about it. That brings us to, we'll do one more, strategic action 9, and which is called transform systems. Some of you are thinking big. You're thinking about how to be an entrepreneur inside of a company, or you're thinking about how to be an entrepreneur, set up your own company. But maybe some of you are even going well beyond that and thinking about transforming systems, making significant impact, making a difference. And if that is the case, we have some great examples in the book for that. But we also know that they're following some patterns, some things that we've noted, trying to find synergy, collaborative action, and making certain people, organizations, and programs that scale to the size where they can now begin to transform the system. I just came from a talk by a judge, Judge Victoria Pratt, wrote a very wonderful book called The Power of Dignity, and it's in her quest to bring human-centered justice into the criminal justice system. And that is a tall order, but what she's talking about is a systems level change. System level changes do not come easy, and it requires partnerships, collaborations, and we talk about those in the book. You can see some equations here. You know, we have STEM backgrounds too, and we like to throw that out there every now and then. But certainly the bigger point is, how do you do it? Well, there are some Black faces who are in high places who are thinking about system change and actually making it happen. And we highlight those folks in the book. So that gives you a pretty broad overview. Dr. Pinkett, why don't you close this out?
Well, thank you, Dr. Robinson. Here again is a summary of the 10 strategic actions that comprise Black faces in high places. I will also mention that the first book, Black Faces in White Places, identified the 10 game-changing strategies. And these 10 strategic actions are reflective of the work that we've done since that inaugural book in 2010 to this book that we re-engaged writing in 2020 amidst the social unrest of George Floyd's murder and COVID-19, and released in February of 2022. If you want to reach us, you can reach Dr. Robinson at his website, jeffreyrobinsonphd.com. You can reach me at my website, Randall Pinkett with 1 L in Randall.com. And we encourage you, if you're so inclined, I think you'll be getting copies of the book, but if you want to point or direct others to purchase copies, we have appropriately been directing people to a Black-owned business to buy this Black book. So you can go to pyramidbooks.com, or you can go directly to the landing page for the book at bit.ly/BFHP-info. So we're looking forward to questions, looking forward to dialogue. We're looking forward to engaging each and every one of you to take a deeper dive into this latest book of Dr. Robinson and mine, Black Faces in High Places. Thank you.
Thank you both for joining us, Dr. Pinkett and Dr. Robinson. I know our participants are looking forward to live Q&A with you just around the corner during the Praxis-to-Power Pre-Institute in June. Stay tuned, everyone. Thank you all for watching. For more information on SICSS-Howard Mathematica, visit our website, follow us on social media, and join our email list.